He fed a starving alien cub, earning the loyalty of its stunning tigress mother. The moon of Callistra was a lonely place. Its valleys stretched wide and empty, its skies heavy with storms. Few people lived here, and that was exactly why Ethan Cole had chosen it. He wanted distance. He wanted silence. He wanted a place where memories could not follow him so easily. His outpost was little more than a steel cabin bolted to the rocks. Most days were spent keeping turbines alive, fixing wires, and sending dull reports to the colony board. Nights were quieter still. He sat by a fire, sipping stale coffee, listening to the wind claw at the shutters. It was not a joyful life, but it was steady, and steady was all he thought he needed. That night, the sky turned blacker than usual. Clouds pressed low over the hills, lightning crawling across the ridges like glowing veins. The rain came fast, slamming the roof so hard the metal groaned. Thunder rolled through the valley, shaking the walls of the outpost. Ethan did not flinch. He had seen storms like this before. He pulled his chair closer to the fire, warming his hands around a tin cup. But just as he was about to settle, he heard something new. A faint scratch at the door. He froze, listening. Maybe it was the wind, maybe debris scraping the siding. But then it came again, slow, deliberate, impossible to mistake. His pulse quickened. He set the cup down, picked up his flashlight, and moved toward the sound. The scratching grew louder. Then came 3 heavy knocks. Not the storm, not the wind. Something was waiting outside. He hesitated only a moment before unlatching the door. The storm poured in instantly, rain lashing his face, lightning flashing white across the valley. And in that flash he saw her. A tall figure, fur plastered to her body, glowing stripes running along her arms and chest. Her emerald eyes burned with desperate intensity. She was no human. She was something else, something wild and powerful. In her arms she held a small cub, limp and unmoving. Ethan's breath caught, fear locking his chest for a heartbeat. But then his eyes dropped to the cub, and the fear cracked. Its breathing was shallow, weak, fading fast. The tigress woman did not speak. She simply stepped inside, crossing the threshold as though there had never been a choice. She laid the cub gently on his table and backed away, her eyes fixed on him. Ethan moved on instinct. He pulled his medkit from the wall, hands shaking but steady enough to work. He checked the cub's breathing, cleaned the wounds, wrapped it in a thermal blanket. He muttered soft words under his breath, knowing they were useless but unable to stop himself. The woman stood motionless. Rain dripped from her fur, pooling on the floor. She made no sound but a low, rumbling growl that never rose into threat. It was something else, worry maybe, or prayer. Minutes dragged on. Then the cub stirred. A faint whimper broke the silence, and its chest rose with a deeper breath. Relief crashed through Ethan. The tigress woman's shoulders slumped, her glowing eyes softening. The rumble in her chest changed into something like a sigh. For the first time, Ethan realized he was looking at a mother, not a predator. He sat back, heart hammering, hands trembling. The storm outside roared on, lightning splitting the sky, rain beating against the roof. But inside, the silence had shifted. For 2 years, Ethan had lived alone with nothing but machines and memory. Now, standing in his cabin, was something alive, something powerful, something that had chosen to come to his door. And though he did not yet understand it, nothing about his life would ever be the same again. The storm showed no mercy that night. The walls rattled, the roof groaned, and lightning split the valley again and again, flooding the outpost with white light. But Ethan barely noticed it anymore. His attention was fixed on the small bundle breathing unevenly beneath the thermal blanket. He checked the cub's pulse again, adjusting the bandage he had tied across its side. The bleeding had slowed, but the weakness in its body worried him. He placed his hand close to its chest, feeling the faint rise and fall. Alive but fragile. When he looked up, the tigress woman was still watching him. Her eyes glowed in the flicker of the fire, unblinking, sharp as blades and yet filled with something else, something deeper. Her fur clung to her, soaked from the rain. Stripes shimmered faintly, as if they held their own light. She had not moved since she placed her cub on the table. Ethan realized how close she stood. Her presence filled the small cabin, every breath vibrating in the air. For a moment his fear returned. She was taller than him, stronger by far, every line of her body shaped for survival. If she wanted, she could end him in a heartbeat. But she did not. She just stood there, her gaze locked on her child, and Ethan understood. All her power, all her wildness, meant nothing in this moment. She was a mother watching her cub cling to life. Hours crawled by. Ethan sat at the table, feeding the cub small sips of water, checking its wounds, adjusting the blanket whenever it stirred. The tigress woman never closed her eyes, never shifted her stance. She stood like a statue carved from shadow and storm. Near dawn, the rain finally began to ease. The thunder rolled away, leaving only the soft patter of drops against the roof. The cub gave a weak sound, something between a mewl and a sigh, and shifted its tiny body closer to the heat of the fire. Ethan let out a long breath he did not know he had been holding. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion weighing on him like chains. Across from him, the tigress woman exhaled as well, shoulders loosening. A low rumble escaped her chest, not threatening but soft, almost like a purr. They sat in silence, watching the cub sleep. No words passed between them, yet Ethan felt that something had been exchanged. A thread pulled taut between two strangers who shared nothing but this fragile moment. When the first pale light touched the horizon, Ethan stood and moved to the door. He opened it cautiously, letting the cool morning air sweep inside. The valley lay quiet, scarred by the storm but still standing. He half expected the woman to leave then, to vanish back into the wild with her cub. But when he stepped outside, she followed. The cub remained inside, wrapped in blankets, safe for now. She walked past him, her eyes scanning the horizon, then sat just beyond the porch. She settled into the dirt without a sound, folding her long legs beneath her. Ethan waited. Surely she would rise again, return to whatever life she had before. But she did not. She remained there all day, unmoving, watching him as he worked. He tried to ignore her at first, going about his usual routine, checking turbine readouts, patching a faulty cable, logging system reports. Yet no matter where he turned, he could feel her gaze following him. It was not hostile, but it was constant, as if she weighed his every movement, his every choice. When night came again, she was still there. She did not knock this time, did not enter the cabin. She stayed just beyond the firelight, her glowing stripes faint in the dark. The cub, weak but alive, whimpered now and then, and Ethan tended to it with quiet care. He thought he would wake in the morning to find them both gone. But he was wrong. For days she lingered, silent as a shadow. She brought no words, only her presence. Yet things began to change. The first gift arrived on the third morning. Ethan stepped outside to check the turbines and found a cluster of strange fruit lying near his door. Their skin shimmered faintly, as though soaked in starlight. He looked around, but the woman was already sitting on the ridge, watching from a distance. The next day, she left a flask of clear water, purer than anything he had drawn from the colony filters. On another morning, a piece of scavenged metal lay waiting, its surface clean, free of rust. Useless to her, but valuable to someone who spent his life patching machines. Ethan did not know what to make of it. Gratitude, perhaps, or trust, maybe both. The cub grew stronger each day. Its wounds healed slowly, but its eyes began to open, following him with unsteady curiosity. Ethan found himself speaking to it in soft tones as he worked, telling it what he was doing, as if the words mattered. Sometimes, when he glanced outside, he saw the tigress woman watching closely, her sharp expression softening whenever his voice reached the cub. One evening, he made a choice. He boiled water, steeped dried leaves from his supply, and poured 2 mugs of tea. The smell filled the cabin, warm and calming. He carried 1 mug outside, where she sat at her usual place near the porch. She tilted her head, studying the steam. He held it out, steady but unsure. For a long moment she did not move. Then slowly she reached forward. Her clawed fingers brushed against his hand as she took the cup. She sniffed it cautiously, then brought it to her lips. She sipped once, twice, and made a soft sound in her throat. Approval, perhaps. He almost laughed at the strangeness of it all, him, a solitary human technician, sharing tea with a tigress-like being from a world he would never understand. That night, she did not leave. She stayed near his fire, her stripes glowing faintly in the dim light. The cub lay between them, small and fragile, but alive. For the first time in years, Ethan felt that the silence in his cabin was not empty. The storms would come again. The loneliness would try to return. But something had shifted. The tigress woman was no longer just a visitor at his door. She had become a presence, a shadow in his days, a companion he did not ask for but no longer wished to lose. And deep inside, though he dared not admit it yet, Ethan knew the storm had brought more than just rain that night. It had brought change. The days turned into a rhythm that Ethan had never expected. Each morning he woke to find the tigress woman still nearby, her tall frame crouched against the rocks, her glowing eyes following his every step. At first it unsettled him, but soon it became part of his life, like the hum of the turbines or the crackle of the fire. She never spoke, not a word. She moved like a shadow, silent but always present. When he walked the ridges to check the turbines, he sometimes glimpsed her following at a distance, her stripes faint in the pale light. When he repaired broken wiring or dragged heavy crates of tools, she stood close enough to see but never close enough to touch. She seemed to be guarding him, though Ethan could not say why. The cub grew stronger with each passing day. Its wounds healed, its breathing steadied, and its small body began to fill with energy again. It stumbled across the cabin floor, claws clicking on the metal, chasing flickers of firelight. Whenever Ethan smiled at its antics, he noticed the tigress woman's expression change. Her sharp, watchful face would soften, the corners of her mouth pulling upward in a faint, almost human curve. She began leaving gifts more often now. Fruit, water, scraps of scavenged metal, even bundles of herbs that gave off a soothing smell when burned. Ethan accepted them, unsure what else to do, and found himself talking more and more. First to the cub, then to her. At first it was only simple things. He would point to his tools and say their names. Wrench, wire, battery. He would explain what he was fixing, even though she did not answer. Sometimes, when the cub rested, he would sit by the fire and tell her about the turbines, or about the storms, or about the strange creatures he had seen in the distance. He spoke not because he expected her to understand, but because the silence no longer felt empty when he filled it with words. One evening, while he patched a crack in a generator coil, he felt her move closer than usual. She crouched beside him, her emerald eyes fixed on the sparks that leapt from his tools. He kept working, careful not to flinch. When he was done, she tilted her head and gave a low rumble, almost approving. He looked at her, and though she said nothing, he felt as though she had understood. The cub had begun to follow Ethan everywhere. It padded behind him when he carried tools, curled at his feet when he worked, and climbed onto his lap when he sat too long by the fire. Its playful sounds filled the cabin, chasing away shadows that had lingered for too many nights. Ethan never said it aloud, but the cub had become a comfort he had not known he needed. One night, after a long day of repairs, Ethan boiled water and poured 2 mugs of tea again. He carried one outside to where she sat near the porch. This time she did not hesitate. She reached for it quickly, her claws brushing against his hand. Her touch lingered for a heartbeat longer than before. They sat together by the fire, the cub curled between them. The night was still, the stars faint behind drifting clouds. For the first time, Ethan realized he was no longer waiting for her to leave. A part of him hoped she never would. The next morning brought a surprise. He stepped outside to check the turbines and found not fruit, not water, but a piece of scavenged technology. A small power cell, cracked but reparable. He turned it over in his hands, puzzled. Only someone who had been watching him carefully would know how useful it was. When he looked up, she was there, standing tall on the ridge. For the first time, she did not look away when his eyes met hers. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if waiting for his reaction. Ethan raised the power cell, holding it up in thanks. Her eyes glowed brighter, and she gave a short, low sound. A sound that could only mean approval. Ethan found himself speaking more openly after that. He told her about his work, about how the turbines kept the colony alive, about how storms could break circuits in an instant. Sometimes, when he spoke of these things, he thought he saw her listening carefully, her head tilting, her ears flicking as if she was trying to catch every word. One evening, while he sat with the cub in his lap, Ethan told her something he had not told anyone in years. He spoke of Anna. He spoke of the shuttle accident, of the sudden silence it left in his life, of how he had come here to escape everything human because he could not bear the weight of it anymore. The Tigress woman listened, her face unreadable. When he finished, the silence stretched long. He thought perhaps he had spoken too much, revealed too much. But then she shifted, lowering herself closer to the cub. She placed her hand gently on its back, and for the first time, Ethan understood the truth. She too had lost something. That night she stayed inside. Not just near the firelight, not just at the door, but inside the cabin itself. She curled against the wall, her cub nestled against her side. Her glowing stripes dimmed as she drifted into rest, and Ethan felt the cabin warmer than it had been in years. In the nights that followed, her presence became constant. She no longer waited outside. She sat with him by the fire, her rumbling breath filling the silence. She followed him more closely during the day, sometimes stepping beside him as he worked. It was not just protection now. It was something else. Ethan did not dare name it. Not yet. But he knew one thing. The Tigress woman was no longer a stranger at his door. She was becoming part of his life. And the silence he once thought he needed had been broken forever. Days passed, and the silence between Ethan and the Tigress woman began to shift. She no longer lingered at the edge of his world. She was now inside it. She shared his fire. She accepted his food. She rested while the cub played on the cabin floor. At first, Ethan thought it would always remain this way, him talking, her listening. But slowly, she began to change. It started with a single word. One evening, Ethan poured 2 mugs of tea. He placed one in front of her, as he had done many times before. This time, when she reached for it, she paused. Her glowing eyes lifted to his face. Her mouth opened, and a low sound came out. It was rough, broken, but the shape of it was clear. Thank. Ethan froze. His chest tightened. Not with fear, but with something sharper. Something that made his heart pound. He gave a small nod, his voice steady but gentle. You are welcome. She repeated it softly, the syllables awkward but determined. Welcome. From then on, her words grew piece by piece. She learned quickly, her sharp mind catching meaning in every gesture, every sound. She pointed to the cub and whispered, Child. She pointed to the fire and said, Warm. When Ethan said her name aloud, Shira, the name he had chosen in his mind, she accepted it with a quiet rumble, as if claiming it as her own. For the first time, Ethan felt the silence breaking in a way that did not hurt. One night, while the storm winds howled outside, they sat together in the cabin. The cub was asleep, curled in its blanket. Ethan looked at Shira, her stripes glowing faintly in the firelight, and asked softly, Why do you stay? She lowered her eyes, her claws tracing slow lines across the floor. At first, he thought she would not answer. But then, in halting words, she spoke. Mate gone. Her voice was raw, heavy with meaning. Protect cub. Alone. Ethan felt the words sink deep into him. Her loss was different from his, yet painfully the same. He stared at the flames, the image of Anna rising in his mind. The shuttle, the fire, the silence that followed. His voice cracked as he spoke. I lost her too. The one I loved. She was all I had. And then, nothing. Shira's gaze lifted to him. Her emerald eyes softened, the fierce glow dimming. She reached out slowly, her claws brushing the back of his hand. It was a touch so careful, so deliberate, that Ethan almost could not breathe. Neither spoke after that. They did not need to. The days that followed carried a quiet shift. Shira no longer sat apart. She walked beside him when he worked, sometimes handing him tools without being asked. She shared his meals, her movements slower, more trusting. She even laughed once, a low, rumbling sound, when the cub clumsily knocked over a water pot. Ethan found himself watching her when she did not notice. The way the firelight shimmered across her stripes. The way her eyes softened when she looked at the cub. The way she tilted her head when she tried to form human words, determined but patient. One evening, as the sky burned orange with sunset, Ethan poured tea as always. He handed her the mug. Their hands touched. For the first time, she did not pull away. Her claws rested lightly against his skin, her gaze fixed on him. The fire crackled. The cub stirred in its sleep. And in that quiet moment, Ethan felt the walls around his heart begin to break. Shira stayed inside that night. Not by the wall, not near the door, but closer, beside him, within reach. The cabin was no longer his alone. For the first time in years, Ethan did not feel like a man waiting for something to end. He felt like a man waiting for something to begin. The storm season returned without warning. The sky grew dark in the middle of the day, and the valley filled with rolling thunder. Ethan had lived here long enough to know what it meant. Something was about to break. That evening, alarms from the colony grid echoed through his cabin. The turbines scattered across the hills were overloading, sparks racing down the lines. If one failed, the whole network could collapse, leaving not just his outpost but the neighboring farms without power. Ethan grabbed his coat and tools. Shira's eyes followed his every move. "Danger," she said in her halting voice, her claws curling tight around the edge of the table. "I have to go," he answered. "If I do not, the grid will fall." The cub whimpered in the corner. The wind howled like a beast outside. Shira stepped toward him, her body tense, but Ethan touched her arm gently. "I will be back." Then he ran into the storm. Rain slashed across his face. Lightning split the sky, and the roar of the turbines shook the ground. He reached the nearest one, climbed the ladder, and forced the system into manual override. Sparks snapped against his gloves. His chest burned with every breath, but he kept moving, one turbine at a time. Then the flash came. A bolt of lightning struck the ground nearby, the shockwave throwing him off his feet. He hit the earth hard, pain tearing through his side. His vision blurred. He tried to stand, but another surge ripped down the turbine line. The air filled with blinding light, and then everything went black. When awareness returned, it was not the storm he heard. It was a deep, steady rumble, low, soothing, close to his ear. His eyes opened to the sight of firelight flickering across the cabin walls. He lay on the floor, wrapped in blankets, every muscle aching, and Shira was there. Her fur was wet, singed in places where sparks had touched her, but she did not seem to care. She sat close, her arms wrapped around him, her warmth seeping into his body. The rumble was her purr, steady and strong, as if to will him back from the edge. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was raw. Only one word slipped out. "You." Her eyes met his, fierce and tender all at once. "Safe," she said simply. The cub stirred nearby, giving a soft cry. Shira pulled Ethan closer, resting his head against her shoulder. For a long time, they stayed like that, unmoving, the storm raging outside but powerless to touch them within. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he did not feel cold. He felt held. He felt wanted. By morning, the storm had passed. The turbines stood damaged but still alive. And something inside Ethan had changed. He no longer looked at Shira as a stranger. He looked at her as someone who had chosen to risk everything for him. Someone who had refused to let him slip into the dark. Their bond was no longer silent. It was unspoken, yet unbreakable. The storms ended as quickly as they had begun. The valley grew quiet again, the skies clear and pale. For a while, life returned to routine, repairing damaged lines, tending to the cub, sharing quiet meals by the fire. But beneath that calm, Ethan sensed a shift coming. It arrived one morning, carried by a sharp tone from the comms console. A message from the colony administration. The voice on the other end was flat, professional, but every word struck like a hammer. Report received of alien presence near your sector. Relocation teams are prepared to transfer the subject and offspring to the reserve. Human safety is priority. Prepare them for collection within 3 days. Ethan stood frozen. His chest tightened as if the air had been sucked out of the cabin. He turned slowly. Shira was sitting on the floor, sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a crude blade. Her ears flicked at the sound of the transmission, but her eyes stayed on him. The cub, now strong enough to stumble about, pawed at Ethan's boots, unaware of the weight that had just fallen on them. That night, the fire crackled between them. Ethan tried to eat, but the food turned to dust in his mouth. Finally, he set his bowl aside and looked at her. "They want to take you," he said quietly. Her ears twitched. Her gaze met his. She tilted her head, the faintest hint of a growl in her throat. "They want to move you to a place far away. A reserve. With others of your kind. Safe, they say." Silence stretched. The cub yawned, curling near the fire. Shira looked at it for a long moment, then back at him. Her tail curled once around her legs, then slowly uncurled toward him, brushing against his knee. Her voice was low, careful, but firm. "Here." Ethan's heart slammed in his chest. He swallowed hard. "You will want to stay here? With me?" Her emerald eyes held his. She leaned closer, her claws brushing his hand, and repeated, more certain this time, "Here." The decision was not logical. It was not safe. But logic had abandoned him long ago, on the day he lost Anna, on the day he chose exile instead of life. Now, faced with the Tigress and her child, logic no longer mattered. The next morning, he sent his reply to the colony. His voice was steady, sharper than he felt inside. "Relocation not required. No danger present. My sector remains stable. Outpost fully secure." He cut the transmission before they could argue. The following days carried a strange peace. Ethan worked the turbines. Shira walked beside him, carrying tools with ease. The cub chased insects in the tall grass, its laughter half growl, half chirp, echoing in the air. At night, the cabin was no longer a hollow shell. It was a home. The final evening of the storm season came quietly. The sky was painted gold, the valley washed in soft light. Ethan sat on the porch, his mug warm in his hands. The cub tumbled nearby, batting at shadows. Shira stepped out of the cabin, her stripes glowing faintly in the dusk. She stood tall, proud, her eyes catching the last light of the sun. For a moment, Ethan simply looked at her, unable to believe how far they had come. Without a word, she crossed the porch and lowered herself beside him. The wood creaked softly under her weight. Then, slowly, she rested her head on his shoulder. Ethan closed his eyes. The warmth of her fur, the steady rumble of her chest, the sound of the cub's laughter. It all wrapped around him. For the first time in years, he was not just surviving the silence. He was living within it, and he knew he would never go back.